Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Bipartisan Policy Center and our event discussing digital counterterrorism, fighting jihadists online. Last September, when a BPC task force headed by Governor Tom Kean and Lee Hamilton took a look at the last 16 years of our counterterrorism policy to ask if we're winning the fight against terrorism, and if not, why not, and issued this report, they made the argument briefly that our counterterrorism policies aren't comprehensive enough, that too often we're focused on fighting the latest threat du jour or looking at a particular threat vector and not taking a wide-ranging enough look. And one issue that kept coming up in our conversations about that was about terrorist use of online resources. And so spurred by that, today we're releasing a new report on digital counterterrorism, fighting jihadists online, which tries to take a problem that I think we're all familiar with, but put it in a more comprehensive light. So often we talk about individual problems, whether it's the use of social media by terrorists to recruit, posting of propaganda, use of encryption to try to plan and coordinate attacks. And we try to cast all of these as part of a spectrum that we need to deal with and not think about solutions to any one of these problems, but to have a more comprehensive solution that thinks about how we complicate terrorist operations online more broadly. And similarly, we say this is not a problem just in the United States, but a problem that plagues European countries and many others around the world as well. And whatever solution we come up with has to be more comprehensive internationally. And so to debate a lot of that and talk more about the report, we're very pleased to have an expert panel that's going to be moderated by Gopal Ratnam from CQ Roll Call. But before then, we are pleased to have a keynote address from Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber and International Communications and Information Policy, Rob. I don't know if you ever remember the entirety of your title yourself. Rob Strayer, to talk about some of the international dimensions of this problem. Rob has joined the State Department after a long stint on Capitol Hill, serving as General Counsel to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and previously on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. But I think the real reason Rob got his job and the jewel in his professional crown is the time that Rob spent here at the Bipartisan Policy Center as the director of our Homeland Security Project, working with Governor Kean and Congressman Hamilton, and doing a lot of really interesting work at the time on cyber issues, including a groundbreaking report on information sharing. I learned a lot from Rob at the time, and so I'm really pleased to have him back at the BPC. Rob.
Good morning. Thank you, Blaise, for that kind introduction. And I do cherish the time that we were working together as colleagues here. I also learned a lot from you. And I do want to start by thanking the Bipartisan Policy Center for hosting us here today. As Blaise mentioned, I'm at the State Department heading up the Cyber International Communications Office. My position covers all aspects of international cyberspace and internet policy. And that's from cooperating with allies to counter cyber attacks, to promoting free flow of data online that underpins our digital economy, and all the way to engaging with industry on a number of issues, including coordinating on counterterrorism online policy. Countering the use of the internet for terrorist purposes is a complex and cross-cutting issue. And it's an issue that's at the nexus of cyber policy and counterterrorism, with important relationships with international human rights and other forms of international law. Therefore, we must work closely at the State Department with the Bureau of Counterterrorism and other parts of the State Department, as well as with a number of other federal departments and agencies to address this important cross-jurisdictional, cross-disciplinary issue. Countering the use of the internet for terrorist purposes is not something that we can address in isolation. It must be considered together with protecting civil liberties online, with maintaining the internet as a venue that is open, interoperable, secure, and reliable. And it also must be considered along with preserving the digital economy as an engine for future economic growth. Together, this makes countering violent Islamist extremism online one of the most important foreign policy challenges that we face today. The report that the Bipartisan Policy Center has released is an important addition to the discussion about how we can achieve these interrelated objectives. From my time at the BPC, I have an abiding appreciation of the importance of doing the hard work of reconciling competing viewpoints on contentious issues and working together to find viable, enduring consensus solutions. This is a model that can be made to work in a variety of policy areas, as the Bipartisan Policy Center has demonstrated over the years. I think that the BPC's approach to policymaking is particularly applicable to interactions between government and industry in countering terrorism online. Certainly, government and industry bring different perspectives and interests to the table, but at the end of the day, we all share an interest in keeping our country secure and ensuring that the internet can continue to play the vital role that it does in our society. By working together collaboratively, we are finding approaches that leverage America's best traditions of innovation and the dynamism of the private sector to protect society in a manner consistent with our values. As this audience is well aware, expanded use of the internet and internet-enabled information and communications technology in the last few decades has produced tremendous economic growth. Businesses benefit from open data flows across borders in order to process information in the cloud, providing enhanced computing power and very useful data analytics. Businesses also use cross-border data to maintain supply chains around the world. In the United States, internet companies are now estimated to account for 7% of our GDP, larger than the construction sector. And it is estimated that 75% of the benefits derived from information and communications technologies go to non-ICT businesses. So then, in a sense, all businesses are becoming technology companies. Around the world, billions of people have benefited from this economic growth generated by the internet, and that's provided shared prosperity and improved quality of life around the globe. The internet has also yielded new ways for people to share information. Technologies have offered unprecedented opportunities for people to connect with each other and to access information about the world around them. They are able to now participate in public debates about their future and help determine what goes on in their democracies. At the same time, the internet and other technologies are being used for nefarious purposes. As the BPC report details, social media is being used by terrorist groups to distribute propaganda, supporting their efforts to radicalize susceptible individuals to commit acts of violence and to recruit potential followers around the world. Likewise, state actors are also using these tools to sow division and undermine democratic processes. The BPC report also notes that encrypted messaging services provide secure global communications for terrorist propaganda, radicalization to violence, recruitment, and attack planning. Of course, we must recognize the seriousness of these threats, but at the same time, we must keep in mind that the internet, including social media and encryption, are incredibly powerful tools, and that technology itself is not the problem. The internet is a neutral tool, a technological medium that we have. Terrorists and other criminals who misuse this and other technologies are the problem. While we continue to work to prevent the misuse of these tools, we should recognize that technology will always be abused by bad actors, such as terrorists and other criminals. It is our responsibility, therefore, to aggressively investigate, disrupt, prosecute, and prevent crimes, protecting our society without sacrificing our fundamental values. Those values include a commitment to protecting freedom of expression and the exercise of fundamental freedoms online. We encourage countries to respect these fundamental freedoms while also preventing terrorists from using the internet to recruit followers or radicalize others to violence. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution means that the U.S. government generally cannot remove content from the internet, nor can it coerce or force others, including internet service providers, to do so. The right to freedom of expression also has international underpinnings. The freedom of expression is memorialized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and is laid out in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is a treaty to which the United States and 167 other countries belong. In the U.S. government's discussions with other foreign governments and in international venues, we stress both of these important underpinnings. There are narrow limitations on this freedom. U.S. law enforcement does not seek to compel the removal of internet content unless it clearly violates a U.S. law. For example, child pornography, criminal activity, and incitement to imminent violence are not protected. Likewise, the U.S. government recognizes the importance of strong encryption. It is a key tool to secure commerce and trade, safeguard private information, and promote freedom of expression and association. Encryption is also critical for strong cybersecurity. Encryption and anonymity tools facilitate digital safety for at-risk users, including journalists, members of civil society, and citizens from malevolent states and non-state actors. At the same time, encryption poses a grave challenge for our national security and law enforcement professionals who work to ensure that malicious actors are held to account and cannot exploit technology as a means to evade the law. There will always be the risk that encryption may be used by terrorists or others for illegal purposes, and we must do our utmost to prevent this. With this in mind, we and others in the government will continue to engage with the private sector to find ways to address the national security and public challenges we face with the use of encryption. While we work to counter the use of the internet for terrorist purposes, we must continue to focus on the terrorists and potential terrorists themselves. This means countering violent extremism and terrorism online must be an integral part of our CVE campaign. Likewise, while we continue to work closely with industry to assess how Russia used social media to conduct influence efforts and sow division, we must also focus directly on the unacceptable actions themselves. We will cooperate with our allies to deter future Russian misbehavior. We must impose costs on Russia for their unacceptable actions, ranging from influence operations to cyber attacks. The transborder nature of the internet means it's not just the United States trying to figure out what the right approach is to address the challenges from threats online. There are many other nations involved in this, and we're going to have to work together to find interoperable solutions that are tailored to each nation's constitutional and legal systems. And to prevent the fragmentation of the internet, these solutions must be done in a manner that does not disrupt the international flow of data. As we approach these complicated policy issues, we need to avoid falling into the trap of false dichotomies. On the one hand, we can counter the use of internet for terrorist purposes, and we must also be able to protect freedom of expression, secure communications, and the open, interoperable, secure, and reliable nature of the internet. Those are not mutually exclusive objectives. We should recognize that governments have both an obligation to protect their citizens and an obligation to ensure that citizens can enjoy the benefits of the internet. We must avoid a fragmented internet and rules that limit freedom of expression and that frustrate innovation. Addressing these interrelated obligations requires public policy measures that are carefully crafted to counter terrorism without creating barriers to innovation and free expression. If, in the name of promoting security, government subjects the digital economy to unnecessarily bureaucratic structures, processes, and regulations, or if it politicizes technical innovation, they will limit its dynamic nature, impose inefficient controls on users, and stifle future economic growth. So what should government do? We believe that government should take appropriate steps to counter the use of the internet for terrorist purposes while respecting their international obligations and commitments regarding the freedoms of expression, association, freedom of assembly, and religion. And that as well, they should note that they should allow the free flow of information and an open and interoperable internet. Efforts to counter terrorism in cyberspace should focus on criminal activities that facilitate terrorism, such as recruitment, illicit financing, attack planning and coordination, and other crimes committed online. Counterterrorism should not be used as a justification to limit free speech or as a pretext for targeting political opposition or suppressing dissent. Engagement with industry to counter terrorism online should be done on a collaborative basis. Private companies are free to choose to voluntarily remove terrorist websites or social media accounts that contain content that violates their user service agreements. In engaging with the private sector companies in this manner, governments should take great care to ensure that they do not engage directly or indirectly in censorship that is inconsistent with respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Furthermore, government should take care to avoid unintentionally restricting the abilities of those who seek to identify and counter violent extremist messaging online. Now a word about the private sector. Over the last several years, the U.S. technology sector has become significantly more active in efforts to counter the use of its platforms for terrorist purposes, and we applaud those efforts. For example, Facebook announced in 2017 they would be hiring more than 3,000 new employees to focus on reviewing and potentially removing terrorist messaging on its platform. And Twitter has increased its activity in this space through account suspensions and dramatically limited the ability of groups like ISIS to radicalize and recruit individuals to violence on its platform. Likewise, Google and YouTube have also implemented programs to increase the speed with which terrorist content is identified and removed from its platforms. The BBC report highlights some great examples of industry collaboration in this area that I would like to highlight. The industry-led Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism, which was announced in June of 2017 by Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, and Google and YouTube, builds on existing initiatives by industry and brings them together under a single umbrella organization. The Forum to Counterterrorism efforts combine several existing industry initiatives to address terrorist recruitment material on the internet and to promote counter-narratives to potential terrorist recruits. Initiatives under the Forum to Counterterrorism focus on development of technological solutions, research, and knowledge sharing. There's also an effort to bring smaller and emerging technology companies into the forum to help share best practices with regards to countering terrorism online. This includes the partnership with another important initiative called the Tech Against Terrorism, which is the United Nations Counterterrorism Executive Directorate project to build trust with global technology industry to help support companies in tackling the use of the internet for terrorist purposes while still respecting human rights. It's very important that we work with not just the largest social media platforms, but as well as work with small and medium enterprises in the technology space. Another important initiative is the Shared Hashing Database, a partnership between the founders of the Forum to Counterterrorism, which seeks to establish hashes, which are unique digital fingerprints for terrorist media products that have been removed from their services. The use of this database makes it easier for industry to share identified terrorist information across their platform and decrease the amount of time that identified terrorist content exists on platforms before its removal. While removing terrorist content is important when done appropriately and is a shared objective of government and industry, we should not get too fixated on taking down content instantly. Government engagement with industry on removals needs to be cognizant of the technical realities of removing content on large distributed platforms and not unduly limit the freedom of expression and ability of companies to do business online. If you push for too quick a removal process, it could create a perverse incentive for companies to take down anything remotely controversial, lest they potentially face fines from governmental authorities. And that's not something we want to see happening. Likewise, governments need to consider the focus of their efforts to push for removal of terrorist content. What is illegal in one jurisdiction is not necessarily illegal in another. In some countries, particularly the United States, place a premium on the ability of people to freely access information online. Furthermore, we need to recognize the technical limits of what is possible. While at some point in the future, it may be possible for artificial intelligence or machine learning to accurately identify de novo terrorist content, we want to make sure that automated decision-making is well tested and does not inappropriately suppress potentially protected or lawful content, which may include religious speech. All of these competing concerns argue for the need for robust discussion, including all stakeholders, before government introduces new legislation or policies in this area. Oftentimes, alternative viewpoints are more effective responses to objectionable speech than suppression of that speech. Governments need to work closely and creatively with civil society, academia, and the private sector, and to commit to enhance online access and build appropriate digital literacy skills for those that can be the strongest voices to counter that messaging. Those include community leaders, religious leaders, women, and youth that can be effective messengers to counter those narratives. This type of counter speech is also an important element of countering terrorism online. Each of the 4 founding industry members of the Forum to Counterterrorism already has robust counter-speech initiatives in place. In conclusion, I'd like to offer the observation that the challenge of countering terrorism online, like the internet itself, is a multifaceted challenge, and it demands and requires multi-stakeholder engagement. It is going to require the collaboration and cooperation of many actors to address this challenge. I'm confident by following the BPC's example of finding strength and creativity through a diverse range of viewpoints and differences of opinion, that governments, industry, and civil society can come together to further advance these collaborative efforts to counter the use of the internet for terrorist purposes. For everyone here today, I look forward to partnering with you on these and other important issues. Please stay in touch with me and my team at the State Department. I would note that Alex Greenstein is also here with me today from my office. Unfortunately, I need to return to the State Department for other meetings, but I look forward to watching the discussion online later. And I just want to commend all of you for taking part in this discussion. I think we're on a long road here. We're probably not going to solve this today, but I think this is an important step forward, including with this report. So please let us know at the State Department the challenges you are facing and how we can work better together with you. Thank you.